I'm here to speak of my long-time friend, Joanne Ganane. I was fortunate enough to befriend Jo from an early age in Hampton Park at primary school. Our families knew of each other from when Jo's parents, John and Betty Ganane, and family lived nearby my Uncle Terry and his family in Ringwood. We had many things in common. As classmates, as easy as it is to believe, Jo was always one of the smarties, and as hard as it is to believe, this buffhead here was also one of the smarties. Jo and I would always keep checks on each other's grades, me trying to outsmart her and her outsmarting me. Her smarts and intelligence would go on to carry her well through her life, always employed and always moving forward. We both loved our sport. And of course, we both had these ridiculously large dimples. With Jeanette, Danny, Jackie and Kate, Jo was always out and about in Hampton Park, our playground. Back then, we were all thick as thieves and everyone looked out for each other. With a family that's origins were in Richmond and her grandfather Fat a player and Uncle Paddy a premiership player at Richmond, Jo was mad for her Tigers. I too supported the Tigers for a while there, and footy talk was regular with Jo, and she knew her game. Of course, I would later end up a Melbourne supporter, which wasn't a good move, while Jo got to savour the recent success of Richmond, making sure she was there at the G to watch her Tigers raise the Premiership Cup. As well as her love for footy, she was also a talented netballer, and she racked up plenty of time on the court. As we grew older, as happens, we would drift apart but always find ourselves back in each other's company, either at family parties, knocking around amongst ourselves, or when I caught up with Jo at Cranny Tech. As we all know, Jo wasn't short of a word, a Ganane trait that makes you think they have a third lung to get through a conversation. And she would run the conversation, updating you with how her family was travelling and what had been happening in her life, and then asking how you and yours were going. She would always be chatting with one and all, old and young. Her personality made her popular with anyone and everyone, knockabouts or toffs. When her mum Betty fell ill and passed in the early 90s, it was a real kick in the guts for Jo and the Ganane family. Bet was a staunch supporter of them all, and her loss was so unfair. To see Jo kick on around this time and set herself to buy a place of her own showed her character, strong and smart. Later she found her place in Beaconsfield, but was always back on her old stomping grounds with family and friends. While Jo did not get to have kids of her own, she was always so proud of her nephews and nieces. She would make sure they knew she was proud of them, and I'm sure they all returned the love. Her dad John, a character to say the least, would pass, and of course, Jo and the Gananes felt the loss a hard thing to bear, but life went on. For me, nothing ever changed with Jo. When I'd see her, she'd yell "Wayness," and we'd set off into a conversation. She'd tell others that I was the smartest and brightest as kids, but I knew who was. You were, Jo. At my 40th, she couldn't help herself when a few speeches were being made and she swooped on the mic to talk of old days and good times. She was fantastic, having a laugh amongst our friends and my family. I loved that she was there. We would continue on bumping into each other here and there, and without missing a beat, we would have a great catch-up and a laugh. I loved how she'd keep in touch with her family, immediate or distant, like taking a trip to the Blue Mountains a few years back to spend time with family members. Photos of her looking as happy as a pig in shit. I loved how she seemed content and strong enough to be able to live on her own. Once again at my 50th catch-up last year, there she was in her element, chatting and laughing. I loved that she was there. Thankfully, I caught up with Jo several times in the last couple of months. Nothing different, and full of life. I loved that she seemed to be loving life. I loved how proud she was of her place in Beaconsfield and the work she'd had recently done. I love that I got a chance to give her a cuddle and a kiss on the cheek when we last said goodbye. And now we are here. Jo's passing an absolute shock, leaving a hole for me and I'm sure for all of you here that will never be filled. No more "G'day Waynus," no more chats, no more laughs. But I love that we all had memories of good times with a young girl and then a woman who always filled the room with her wonderful personality. I posted something the other day, a couple of lines about how as a young fella I once bought Jo flowers and wrote on a card that we'd be forever friends, and I love that Jo will be forever that. Rest easy, my forever friend.